Hello, BookTube. Because I wouldn't want it said that I'm not willing to suffer for my imaginary BookTube friends, I went out today to go to the Brattle Bookshop here in Boston. Those of you who are new to the channel, it's a great used bookstore in downtown Boston. It's 3 stories, rapid turnover of titles, always out buying, and there's a huge sale lot next door. Thousands and thousands of books. Most of them in good condition for $1, $3, or $5 on all subjects under the sun. Go there all the time. But the subway system here in Boston is currently in disarray. And a fleet of shuttle buses have been employed to make up the difference. And I knew that I was going to have to use those shuttle buses to get to the Brattle. And that's a big deal. That's a fuss, as opposed to getting on the 100-year-old falling apart subway line and just hoping that you make it all the way in a straight shot. Instead, it was a whole bunch of rigmarole to get there. So at first I thought, well, these renovations, so to speak, on the subway are designed to last until mid-September. I'll just wait until then. But no, no, I can't wait a month to go back to the Brattle. So I suffered for you. I went to the Brattle Bookshop. It took a lot longer to get there than it usually does, but I arrived, I shopped, I found a ton of books that I want to show you, and then I made my way back here. And it worked. Obviously, I'm in one piece. It wasn't even all that bad, but I don't want to stress that because I want you to feel guilty. I want to lay an Irish Catholic guilt trip on you. So let's just say, for the purposes of discussion, that I was in agony the whole time. And I found a ton of books that I want to show you. The first one is the only mass market paperback, and the only reason I got it, there were 2 reasons that I got it. One is because it coincides with the BookTube event, and the other is because it was in perfect condition. It's by Stephen Golden. It is Trek to Mad World, one of the very earliest Star Trek novels. This came out in like the late 1970s, 1979, and this is not. It had many reprints, as every Star Trek book did, but this is. Look at that. That is just lovely original cover artwork. And this is the story of an explorer is beamed on board the Enterprise. He's from a particular planet in the Federation or trying to enter the Federation. And he's virtually no sooner on board the Enterprise than he keels over. And Dr. McCoy realizes that it's because of a weird kind of radiation poisoning, and if it affected him, it's probably affecting everybody back on his world. So the Enterprise wants to go and address that. But en route, they are interrupted by... There's a being. The original series, they were the Organians. Beings who had transcended their physical bodies. They appear in one episode, and they impose a peace treaty on the Federation and the Klingons. You don't need to know the Organians. If you're a later Star Trek fan, you mainly just have to think of Q. The Q Continuum. Star Trek is chock-a-block with big, omnipotent energy beings, and one of the Organians goes rogue from his, I guess, Q Continuum or Collective or whatever it is, and decides to create a world and bring a vessel from the Romulans, the Klingons, and the humans to that world. And the mad Organian wants them to know, what is this world missing? What would be your central contribution to make this perfect? And the alien is offering a staggering amount of power to the people who give him the choice that he likes, the answer that he likes. So Kirk is sort of torn. He doesn't want to let the Romulans or the Klingons get what will eventually end up being a massive tactical advantage. But he also doesn't want to forsake his mission to save a whole world from radiation poisoning. And Stephen Golden does a terrific job. I was a little impatient with this book when I first read it in 1979. And I think I've read it once after that. I think it was reissued with a terrible cover. Nothing could beat this. And I reread it then. By then I reread it with a great deal of impatience because in the intervening time, a lot of really good Star Trek fiction had been published, and this sort of paled by comparison. The BookTube event that I mentioned is Book Trek 2022, where we're reading Star Trek fiction. And it has a week left, so I have time to reread Trek to Mad World and see if maybe I mean, I'll do my best to keep this in. If this is in perfect condition, I'll do my best to keep it that way. But maybe this will appeal to me more now that I've read a lot more Star Trek fiction, and also there's the nostalgia element. I remember when this and the Starless World and Vulcan and a whole bunch of other very early Star Trek books came out, and I was grateful for every one of them. So maybe the nostalgia factor will work here. But I got one mass market paperback for Book Trek. All the rest of them are trade paperbacks or hardcovers. Like the first trade paperback here is a novel by Jane Gardam. I read this when it first came out. When was that? 2004. And I loved it. It's Old Filth. In this lovely, is this Europa editions? I think it is. Yeah, this is Europa editions with the French flaps there. And this is a novel, really good, meat and potatoes, personality-driven novel, just ice-pick sharp, about an old lawyer who is now in his 80s, so he is freed from professional obligations. He's got way too much time on his hands. He's allowed now to sort of reflect on his past as he rose through the legal ranks in the British profession. And Old Filth is an abbreviation. I think we're told what it means here. Yes, failed in London, try Hong Kong. That's what this means. Is that he's... What's the matter, baby? Do you want to get down? Can you fit there? There we go. I read this when it first came out, and it is amazing. It starts off with an incredible scene where the main character locks himself out of his house and has to ask for the help of a neighbor that he's not particularly liking. And from that point, in the hapless present, we go to flashback after flashback, and it works wonderfully. I have had this on and off throughout the years, and I always manage to send it away. I always manage to give it to somebody. But it's a lovely format, and I'm up for a reread, very much so. So I grabbed it. These things were all free. It was all store credit, so I didn't spend any money. The next one was a Penguin Classic. This is the Penguin Classic of Utopia by Thomas More. This is translated by Paul Turner with notes. This is Moore's, amazingly enough, it's what he's known for. This and A Man for All Seasons is what he's known for. But in terms of his own writing, Moore is known for Utopia. Erasmus is known for In Praise of Folly. It's kind of amazing. I've always thought of this as more of a conversation starter of a book than an enjoyable read. But when I saw it, I realized I have an old Bantam mass market paperback of Utopia that I don't think is the Paul Turner translation, and nothing else. I saw this and realized I don't have it as a Penguin Classic, so I certainly want it. I'll read the introduction tonight. Then we have an old author named Frank Slaughter. He's not in print anymore. He'll never be back in print. But he had his heyday. He had a long string of books to his credit. And this one is Plague Ship. And it's about the threat of a pandemic, a new pandemic in the modern world. This was done in the 70s. I've never been a huge fan of Frank Slaughter. I tend to like his historical stuff more than his contemporary stuff. But how on earth could I pass up rereading Plague Ship in the wake of and in the midst of a pandemic? People always forget that 20,000 people are dying a month of COVID-19. So the pandemic is not over. It's just in the 21st century, people are just sick of paying attention to it. But thinking mainly of the flashpoint of the first 5 months of 2020, when we all went through it, when the whole world went through a plague, I just wonder what this will be like. Quarantine and R-naughts and all that sort of stuff, all that plague language. I don't think I read this when it first came out, so I'll give it a try now. It'll probably be very uncomfortable reading. And then we have this thing here. This is Richard Armour. He wrote a whole bunch of nonsense verse and silly little books. He wrote silly little books. They're meant to be a chuckle. That's it, just to make you chuckle. This was my favorite of his, so I was overjoyed to find it at the Brattle. It's the only one I would ever want to own. It's called The Happy Bookers, and it's a history in cartoons of librarians, of libraries and librarians. And it's got tons and tons of illustrations all throughout, showing us what libraries were like through the ages, and bringing us down to the present day. But this came out in 1976, the bicentennial, the American bicentennial. So it doesn't come down very far to the present. And the last chapter is librarians today and in the future, in which he does his best to talk about what the future will be like, talking about how microfiche will rule all libraries, and there won't be books anymore. It'll just be microfiche. Of course, he had no idea what was coming, no idea about the internet, no idea about ebooks or anything like that. And he writes, that is assuming, however, that there will still be flesh and blood librarians amidst the microfilm books and computerized library or the Center for Storage and Retrieval. It is possible that librarians will be robots controlled by masterminds having mastery of a master computer at the Library of Congress. Or there will be no libraries and no librarians, flesh and blood or otherwise. The one-time library patron will press a button and turn a dial on his TV, whereupon the requested book in the desired language will appear on the screen, the pages turning at a designated speed. That's your Kindle he's talking about. The only interruptions will be commercials in which authors plug their latest books. These will have produced with electronic typewriters that, when you set to write, will produce overnight a novel, biography, whatever the author has programmed. Then again, as some old-fashioned members of the literary community hope, authors will write much as they do now. Books will be books, libraries will be librarians, libraries will be libraries, and librarians will be librarians. And of course, that has stayed true. Libraries are still there; they're still vital. But I'm sure that when I read through this, I remember the bit about ancient Rome was very funny. But it's a light humor. It's not meant to be incisive or cause any kind of wounds. It's a neat thing that will go on my books about books section. Then the next one that I got, it's in a little rough shape. I'll fix it up. I was really hoping it's a sequel, and I really want the first book, and I looked everywhere and didn't see it. It will turn up. It will turn up. This is by Calvin Hoffman, and it's called The Murder of the Man Who Was Shakespeare. This is his sequel to a book that he wrote called The Man Who Was Shakespeare, in which he puts forward that Christopher Marlowe was the author of the plays of William Shakespeare, and that one of the main reasons that we might not think that is because a lot of the dating of the plays of the man we call Shakespeare are wrong. Right? Because that would be the main stumbling point against Marlowe being the author of the plays attributed to the Stratford man, would be that Marlowe dies way too early in a bar room in Deptford, and that a lot of Shakespeare plays come out after that. This author tends to think, among many other things, he has lots and lots of things to say. I wish I'd found The Man Who Was Shakespeare, but this will do just as well. I haven't read this in forever. This came out in the 70s, I think. Are all these books from the 70s? Let's take a look and see. 1955. Okay, so he has a lot of other theories involved. He had a lot of theories about proving his crackpot idea about Marlowe being Shakespeare. He got permission to look in tombs or to drill a little peephole, looking for buried manuscripts. Walsingham, hoping that Marlowe's boss in Elizabeth's intelligence agency, and also Marlowe's lover, according to the Calvin Hoffman, would have sequestered Marlowe's plays that would reveal all. Nothing ever came of that, although I think Calvin Hoffman was one of the first people to strongly identify the Corpus Christi portrait with Marlowe, that famous portrait there. I wonder if we get the whole thing or if that was too expensive for a book like this. It probably was. Does this have any pictures at all? No, it doesn't. Okay, but that's a detail from this thing right there, not him, not Shakespeare, but that is a detail from a portrait of a young man in Corpus Christi College in Cambridge. That it's not definitive that it's Marlowe, but I think Calvin Hoffman was one of the first people to say for sure, yeah, that's Marlowe. And he goes on at great length. Now, this book will be more about that death in Deptford and how suspicious it was, how suspicious it still is. That subject was done beautifully. The magnum opus of that subject is Charles Nicholl writing the book called The Reckoning. You will never get a better examination of what happened that day in Deptford than The Reckoning by Charles Nicholl. But this is kind of the earlier, kind of a crackpot precursor to The Reckoning. And I haven't read this in forever. Not in forever. So I will read this again. I'll fix it up a little because I can't read it like this. I will read this relatively soon, probably this weekend. Even though I did not find its predecessor, The Man Who Was Shakespeare. I remember the main points of that book well enough. And this one I don't remember as well. So I'll always up for. I have a whole shelf of books about whether or not the man from Stratford was the author of the plays of William Shakespeare. Can't get enough of that subject, and this is a great addition to that. And then we have a seafaring novel, historical Napoleonic era seafaring novel. I love these things. I'm a big fan of Horatio Hornblower. I'm a big fan of Patrick O'Brian, and I also like Dudley Pope. His books on Ramage, Lord Ramage, that follow very much in the Hornblower vein. They follow one character through all the different rungs that would be possible, where he's a midshipman, he's a lieutenant, he's a captain, he's an admiral, he's a lord, that sort of thing. And much like Forster, Pope didn't write the Ramage books in order, chronological order. So they bounce around in the different periods of Ramage's life. And I've had them on and off throughout the ages in UK mass markets. I've had a lot of them in UK mass markets. I had the whole run of them in ebooks until my Nook app bellied up on me and I lost them all. I've also had them in trade paperbacks. I used to sell them at the bookstore in trade paperbacks. I don't have any now, but I found a hardcover with a library plastic jacket over the dust jacket of the very first one, the first one in the Ramage series, simply called Ramage, with really, really neat design. I've never seen this before. I really, really like that design. I don't need the rest of the books in the series. Hornblower and Patrick O'Brian are enough for me to keep, but in terms of a copy to have and to reread and to own, this will do it, very much so. It's in absolutely perfect condition. There's our seagoing adventurous author on the back there, as a young man. Then the next one is history. I recently finished a reread of The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel, and that propelled me right away to Dearman McCullough's biography of Thomas Cromwell, and I reread that. I found trade paperbacks that really didn't survive my rereading. It's in one piece, but that sort of has reawakened a little aspect of my reading all about Tudors, about Tudor history, Tudor fiction, that sort of thing. And I found something by Desmond Seward. Desmond Seward is a British historian. I don't know what his if he has a new book in the works or whatnot. I haven't heard anything about a new book of his in a while, but he wrote a great biography of Henry V. Maybe the best biography of Henry V, and not a long book either. And this is one of his later books. I think this came out after I got back into reviewing. 2013. This is the Last White Rose, and it's all about how unsettled the rule of the Tudors was. Henry VII, King Henry VIII's father, of course, took the throne from King Richard III. It was no brokered deal. It wasn't done through marriage. It wasn't done through inheritance. He won it on the battlefield. And if you win it on the battlefield, you are the definition of a usurper. And usurpers never sit easy in their crowns. It's too fresh in the minds of everyone around them that how their predecessor lost their crown. And as a result, Henry VII was plagued by pretenders to the throne, people claiming to be one or both of the dead sons of Richard's brother Edward, and also plagued by insurrections. And this book looks at those, and it also takes the story forward. It shows you that Henry VIII, his 30 years on the throne, or 30 whatever years on the throne, were regularly punctuated by insurrections to one degree of success or another. The most famous probably being the so-called Pilgrimage of Grace, where at one point the insurrectionist army up in the north was 30,000 people. That was 1,000 times more than what Henry could put in the field, and he knew it. He was counting, everyone around him was counting on that phenomenon sort of frittering away before it got to London. And there were lots of others, too. There were lots of other insurrectionist brushfires in Henry's reign, and this is all about that. So I read this, I think, when Pegasus Books, I think, did this. I think they sent me a copy of this back then. I might even have written about it. If I did, I'll make sure to put a link down below. But it's due for a reread, absolutely. Then this next one is the kind of thing you get at the Brattle Bookshop, where you can get a 100-year-old book out in the sale lot. It's not that the people at the Brattle don't know what's valuable and what's not. It's that they know what will sell in their shop and what won't. Nobody knows better. So if you find a really old book out in the sale lot, it's because it couldn't sell in the store. Probably it had a long time trying to sell in the store. And I found this. I don't recall if I ever saw this in the store, but oh my, am I going to enjoy reading this. Never read it. It is by... oh my God. Who wrote this? It's an old thing. It's a very old book, so it's really onion skin paper. Jared Flagg wrote this in 1892, and it is a life and letters, a big fat biography of Washington Allston, the painter Washington Allston. It's a great big thing. I went through it, and it's got tons and tons of illustrations, but it also has uncut pages. There's that painting, which I know quite well. I know exactly where it's hanging right now, right at this moment. But it also has all sorts of artwork by Washington Allston, and all of that, all the artwork is covered in these onion skin pages. And most of the pages in this thing are uncut. I'm going to have to take a good deal of care, probably 20 minutes, to cut all the pages of this thing and read it. And the neat thing about these 100-year-old life and letter volumes that really aren't done anymore, nobody does a life and letters anymore, is the plan of these biographies was the author will narrate the life, but then there'll be huge amounts of time given over to letters. Because the selling point of these books was, did the author get a hold of letters that have never been seen before? And that was true in this case. Washington Allston, he was born in South Carolina, and when it was pretty obvious that he had artistic talent, he went to England and the continent, and eventually ended up... It's weird to think about him being born in South Carolina or spending time in Europe, because he's such a fixture of New England. He came back to America and spent a quarter of a century in Cambridge, Massachusetts, right across the river, and was active in the Boston political life, or literary life, very much so. And so his art was shown everywhere. He had a big headlight-grabbing show at the Boston Athenaeum. So it's weird to think of him as not being a son of New England, but of course he wasn't. And the neat thing about these lives and letters is that the modern biography approach will have the biographer mention, or the publicist for the book will mention, that it's drawing a lot of things on a lot of raw materials that no one's drawn on before. But they won't present those materials just unencumbered. It'll be the biographer will be sort of sifting through them, giving you good passages, a little quote here and a little quote there. Whereas these old life and letter volumes, they usually have more than one volume. This is only the only one. But usually they go into 2 or 3 volumes. They have all of it. They just dump the letters in there. And Washington Allston married into Boston royalty, married the sister of Richard Henry Dana. And I think Dana helped with the amassing of this book. So it's probably got a lot of stuff that no one's going to care about anymore. There hasn't been, I'm sure, a biography of Washington Allston ever since this book, since 1892. I'm sure there has not been, and there never will be. This is kind of strange, but I'll take it. I'll definitely take it. I have a whole shelf of... actually, there's never been a biography of Dudley Pope, either, as far as I know of. Mark Richardson could correct me if he was still on BookTube, but I don't think there's ever been a biography of Dudley Pope. Talk about leading a fascinating life. Had a ship torpedoed out from underneath him and spent, like, I don't even remember how long, a long time floating in a life raft on the open ocean. And that was just one adventure that he had. His life was full of adventures. I don't think anyone's ever written his biography. But anyway, Washington Allston, I'm pretty sure, has never had another biography. He won't get one. But this will be... The neat thing about Life and Letters volumes is that they really breathe the original people. It'll be everyone that Allston corresponded with. He was a lifelong close friend of Coleridge. So there'll be a lot of that in there as well. That wasn't the only artist biography that I got either. I got another one. It's an oversized thing, and I try to steer away from oversized books because they become such white elephants. I mean, I flip through them and I really like them, but then I don't look at them often enough to justify how awkward they are to store and keep. But I couldn't pass this up. This is by Henry Pitts, and this is a study of Howard Pyle. Look at that cover, huh? And this isn't just one or two things. This is everything that Howard Pyle did. Just everything. So you've got all kinds of photos from his life. You've got all of the artwork that he did in color and in black and white. He was an illustrator as much as an artist. He was. See, you've got a lot of prose too. That's what I'm going to like about this. Is that this is probably a biography. And once again, I'd be willing to bet that Howard Pyle, who was once upon a time the most famous illustrator in the country, very influential on people like N.C. Wyeth, I'd be willing to bet that there has, after this book, never been a biographical treatment of Howard Pyle. I'd be willing to bet that. So the text parts of this are going to be very, very good. Here's Washington's Retreat from Great Meadows. This thing will be full of the historical paintings that Howard Pyle did. He did a lot of other things. He did all sorts of illustrations, pirate illustrations, kids' book illustrations, and he's really known for that. But he did a lot of historical paintings too, and they'll all be in here, along with probably lots of photos from his own life. Fantastic. Just fantastic. Yes, well, I knew this painting. We had a reproduction of this in my school classroom. I saw it every day, just endlessly. There's his painting of Bunker's Hill, Battle of Bunker Hill, Breed's Hill right there. That is, I knew that, every detail of that painting. And there is the artist himself in his studio clothing, so he doesn't get his regular clothing spattered with anything. This is going to be great to go through. I'll have to fix it up a little, but it's going to end up in the little book room, which, not many of these books are. I'll read through these lovingly and probably keep a lot of them, but the little book room is special, and this will be in there, absolutely, oversized or not. And then the final thing that I want to show you, the final thing I got today at the Brattle is also oversized. And I've had this before. I think it's actually shown up on a library tour or two. I keep getting rid of it to people who want it, because it's a really engaging look at the Italian Renaissance, at the height of the Italian Renaissance. But I found a perfect condition copy of it, so I grabbed it again, and I'm hoping that I hold on to it this time. This is A Season of Giants, a larger picture book. See, it's full of pictures and maps, original artwork and color, all that sort of stuff. And it's Michelangelo, Leonardo, and Raphael, and it looks at their artwork and sort of tells their story, the ins and outs of the cities that wanted them and didn't want them, the historical events that they saw and that they commemorated in artwork. And this was a companion volume to a mini-series that came out on TV about 30 years ago. I watched it with me Sainted Ma. It was a great deal of fun. We tuned in on the old TV to watch this mini-series together. Once she initially admonished me, I received the initial admonishment from her not to drone on and on about the history. Let's just watch this. It was a dramatic show. It wasn't a documentary. It starred Mark Frankel. An actor named Mark Frankel plays Michelangelo all throughout this, through all the stages of his life, from a very young man all the way to being older. I don't think the miniseries doesn't follow him all the way to age 100. But Mark Frankel did a wonderful job. He's really good. One of the best things in the miniseries. And he went on to star in the vampire series. I think it was called The Masquerade, or Kindred, or something like that. And he was really good in that too. But he died unexpectedly in an auto accident. Or he'd be a grand old man of TV drama by now. He never picked a bad project, and he was never bad in a project that he picked. But his career was cut off when he was still a young man. And he plays Michelangelo all throughout this miniseries, from his apprentice days to the culmination of the show, which is him finishing the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And in the early hours of the miniseries, we see all of the political machinations that are going on in Florence and elsewhere. We get Ian Holm as Lorenzo de' Medici, and it's one of, or perhaps the worst acting performance that Ian Holm ever gave. I think the production of this thing was probably weird. It might not have been entirely his fault. I get the impression that a lot of it is dubbed from the Italian. So who knows what his on-set direction was like. But he's terrible as Lorenzo de' Medici. But John Glover is in this as Leonardo da Vinci, and there are a couple of moments that Leonardo has that are really, really good. The miniseries, for instance, dramatizes the competition that Leonardo did with Michelangelo for massive frescoes on opposite walls of the same building in Florence. And Leonardo used all sorts of revolutionary paint and fixer chemistry, and it failed. And his painting just sort of collapsed on the wall. It just sort of ran down the wall. And as opposed to telling us about that moment, the producers of the Season of Giants show us that moment. They show us Leonardo standing there as his beautiful mural of the Battle of Anghiari disintegrates. It's an amazing moment. And in the early hours of the miniseries, we see, among many other things, many other plot strands that are going on, that Michelangelo's father doesn't like that he's not bringing in money for the family. He's got a whole bunch of siblings. What is this business about, turning down patrons or irritating people? You're supposed to do what you're told and bring in as much money for the family as possible. And his father is constantly disapproving of Michelangelo, almost all the way out through the miniseries. The sequence where the David is moved from his workshop to its display is amazing. With these workers rolling it through the streets of Florence is amazing. But the culmination happens because of Pope Julius II, who is played here by F. Murray Abraham, and oh my God, he does such a good job. He does such a good job as Pope Julius II. And talk about a tough act to follow, right? I mean, Mark Frankel had to fill the shoes of Charlton Heston as Michelangelo in The Agony and the Ecstasy. And Rex Harrison is Julius II in that movie, saying, "When will you make an end?" So F. Murray Abraham had big shoes to fill, and he does a great job. Oh my God, he's the best thing in the miniseries, The Season of Giants. No idea if this is available for you to watch. No idea if it's on YouTube or not. But he plays Julius II and does a really good job of it. And eventually, that results in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And it's a massive work. It takes a huge amount of effort to do. The story of how Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel ceiling is an epic on its own. I mean, it's a gigantic, really passionate chapter in The Agony and the Ecstasy by Irving Stone. But the one emotional bit that I didn't see coming is at the very end of Season of Giants, when Michelangelo's father enters the Sistine Chapel. And his son is there before him, and the father looks up and is completely overwhelmed. The music just swells. He's completely overwhelmed by this thing. And if you haven't been to the Sistine Chapel, you won't really, if you've just seen pictures of it, you won't realize how overwhelming it is until you go and see it. And the music is swelling, and I was watching it, and I was thinking, okay, so this is going to be a moment where he realizes that his son is actually a genius. But the producer of the miniseries had something else involved, because the visual tour of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel ends with God the Father reaching out to Adam. And suddenly, boom, it's Michelangelo and his father. Oh, this moment just brought it all together. And there's nothing like, this is not a novel. This is just sort of a documentary, oversized art book that went along. It was part of the marketing of that miniseries. But I like it. I think it works really well as a brief and really visual introduction to the Italian Renaissance. I had a copy of this a few years ago, and I believe it was after I had a BookTube channel, because I think one of you got in touch with me and said, I saw you talk about that, and I'm wondering, would that work as the kind of a book that you would just spread on the living room floor to introduce your kids to the Italian Renaissance? And I said, I've never thought about it that way, but yeah, it would work a lot better than a kid's book would, because kids love it when books have room for them to grow into them. They love it when a book doesn't talk down to them. And it's beautifully illustrated. And I think I probably sent it to that person. So now I have it again. I'm going to try and hold on to this one. This one also might make it into the little book room. Not only because I think it's really well done, a really beautiful job, but also, again, for the sentimental reasons. Because me, Saint Ma, and I watched that whole thing, and when we talked about it a little in between episodes. So maybe it will go into the little book room. But anyway, this has gone on quite long enough. This was a hardship Brattle book haul. I suffered through plush, extremely comfortable, clean, neat, and well air-conditioned and almost empty shuttle buses. I suffered through that for you. So that is our Brattle haul here. We have A Season of Giants, a rebuy. We have Pitts' work on Howard Pyle. which is referenced everywhere when there's an art book that references Pyle. This book is always referenced, but I've never owned it. Then we have The Last White Rose by Desmond Seward. This is a book about how uneasy sat the crown on the Tudor head. We have Ramage by Dudley Pope in this great hardcover, the great, very simple, stately cover design. We have The Murder of the Man Who Was Shakespeare, the sequel to The Man Who Was Shakespeare, by a guy who says that it was Marlowe. And then we have The Happy Bookers by Richard Moore, his little book about librarians. We have The Life and Letters of Washington Allston, which is I'm going to need to cut the pages on this. We have Plague Ship by Frank Slaughter, about an earlier pandemic. We have Thomas More's Utopia. And we have Old Filth by Jane Garden. Just a wonderful contemporary novel. Really, really good. And finally, Trek to Mad World by Stephen Golden, who is accused in the introduction to this original paperback of being a were-koala. That was the rumor around Star Trek conventions at the time. No idea if it was true. But anyway, that's my Brattle trip for today. So I did, in fact, go back to the Brattle. And all of you who said that I was going to go back to the Brattle were all right. And it was just comfortable enough, so I think I'll go next week, too. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up for now. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.